morning.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Is Juan's not here today, Stacey? Juan's not here today. So, really good news. I'll tell you guys about this. We had in also Nicole's son. So 2 people gave their lives to Jesus last week. We were really, really excited about that. I was so excited. So really, really good stuff. So, you know, some of you are visitors, and thank you for visiting with us. We're in a really unique stage, especially for you guys who are visitors. We're in a unique stage. We're in the pre-launch of what we believe is going to be a great movement of God in Raleigh. And so we're really excited that you're here. Today we're going to talk about the why. And what I mean the why is we've talked about why a new church, because many of the churches in our country are old, and old is not necessarily bad, but churches go through phases. And when churches get really old, many times they don't focus on mission anymore. They don't focus on what's important. So we feel like in our world, we need lots of new churches. Lots of new churches that understand the mission, that are willing to give their lives away, if you will, to living for Jesus. So we talked about that. Now we want to talk about a little bit of why you're here. Like, what is your why? Okay, what is your why? That's really the basic question today. I called it the big why. But why are we here today? Why have you come to be a part of Life City? I want you to dig deep into that, and you're going to talk more about that in your missional communities this week when you meet. And I'm actually going to try really hard to only share with you for about 15 minutes. And we're going to do something a little different today. I want you guys to break up into groups of people that you might know, people around you. You can take your chairs, put them in a circle, and actually discuss with each other, hey, why is it that you feel like you're here? So we're going to actually do that today, okay? When I did an internship, I believe it was in 1999, I went out to Colorado. It was my first time ever to Colorado. And I realized not long after I was there that I was in Denver, and I was really close to a place called Littleton, Colorado. Well, Littleton, Colorado, I don't know if you guys remember this, but in 1999, there was a huge tragedy that happened there. It was the biggest at a school called Columbine. Remember that? It was on the news. It was all over. These two boys went on a killing rampage, and I think killed like 12 students that day. 21 people were injured. Besides, I mean, it was a massacre. And I remember like being in Colorado and thinking, I want to go see that place. I want to drive around there. That school had shut down for the entire year. And when I realized that we were close by, I asked one of the youth pastors who we had flown out there to speak at this camp. I'm like, man, you got to take me there. I want to go there. So I remember driving on the campus and like literally like looking around. The school was a ghost town, but they were redoing it and finishing it up, you know, making it nice again. And I remember thinking like some of the things that I've only seen on TV, I was looking at in real life. And the school had this feel of this hallowed ground almost, like where people, you know what I mean? Like it was just, you would have to drive there to see it. It really had this weird kind of feeling about it. And the question that kept going through my mind as I was there is, you know, why? Like, what happened? Like, why did these guys do this? And the why, when we ask the question of why, it has the idea of, like, what's the motivation? Like, why are we doing that? It goes down to the deepest part of our soul and says, why are we doing this? Like, what is the motivation? Do we feel like we're going to get something out of this? And hopefully you will. But the why has a lot to do with whether we stick to something or not. Like if you have the right motivation for doing something, it shows itself later on in life. If you're with a company just to make money, well, when the company isn't doing so well, then you're bailing out. But if you're with a company because you believe in it, you're most likely more going to give something more to it. And then even when the going gets rough, you're still in it. You're still sticking to it. And the reason why that's really relevant for us is because for you and I, as members of Life City, when you came on this journey, I don't know if you knew this or not, but you opened yourself up to spiritual attack. You open yourself up to spiritual warfare because the enemy is not happy about what's going on here. You can bank that. And you can also bank that when 2 people come to know Jesus on a Sunday at a church that's just a couple of weeks old, he's really starting to take note. Like, hey, wait, this might be a different kind of deal. this might not be the typical kind of church that I'm used to dealing with. This might be something that actually can make a difference and move and shake for God's kingdom. You see? So for us today, you've opened yourself, and I'm glad that you're here, but I want you to know, you've opened yourself up to spiritual attack. So you need to start to ask the question, why? Why am I here? What's my motivation? And here's what's interesting, and I'm about to tell you just a really quick story about us and why I think we're here, me and my wife. But here's the thing, my why is not your why. My why can't be your why. Now, I think I can give you the ultimate why in just a minute, but my why is not your why. Okay? My why is not your why. So here we go. I want to tell you a little bit about my story. So if you guys are visitors, this is actually a good Sunday to be here. My mom was not able to have a kid for a long time. My mom and dad were married for quite some time before they would have a child. And my mom prayed that she would have a child. That's basically how it went. And she told God that if you ever give me a child, I will give him to you. Now, if you're familiar with Scripture at all, you know the story of Samuel. That's exactly what happened in that story. She says, God, you give me a child, I'll give it to you. I can honestly say that from as long as I can remember, I've felt God's call in my life. Even as a child, I feel like I had God's call in my life. My mom would tell me that I would wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and tell her that I didn't want to be a preacher. I'd get up, tell her I didn't want to be a preacher in the middle of the night, and go back to bed. Even in my dreams, God was working on me. I was a fighter, you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't doing that. I'm not going to be a preacher. I'm going to be like a dirt bike rider or something, you know what I'm saying? Let's do something that's got some adrenaline in it. Even now, my boys are like, you're a preacher like that? That's kind of boring. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. They'll understand later. So I've always had this strong desire, and even when I lived in a small town, I had this desire to like go outside of like 10,000 people where I lived. And I'm thinking like, why would I want to live here? Like I just want to go out and see the world and make an impact for His kingdom. I grew up Catholic, Roman Catholic. Maybe some of you were in the house like that today. I grew up Roman Catholic. I came to know Jesus when I was about 7 years old. My mom told me about Christ. I came to know Christ. After that, we got involved with a charismatic church, and this will hopefully help some of you today. I got involved in the charismatic church, and like, they were always talking about the end of the world, and it was crazy, and they would run around and do this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, Mom, I'm good on that. Let's not do that anymore. So we actually left that church. Actually, my mom went for a little bit, and I left that church. I went to a Baptist church. First Baptist, brother. You know what I mean? I went to one of those churches. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's some great First Baptist churches out there, but there's some that are not so great. And I went to one that was not so great. And when we went there, I'm telling you, man, it was boring. And I thought to myself, good Lord, really? Like, is a church supposed to be like this? Like, this just bored me to tears. And I thought, yeah, there's got to be something in the middle. Right about that time, a pastor moved to my hometown and took over this small church. And he became a mentor of mine. I got involved in this church, and it was a church called Bethel. And it was a good church. I feel like it was in the middle. It wasn't dead, but yet it had some, I call it like charismatic with a seatbelt. You know what I mean? It had like, there's some of that. So that, it has some, you can worship and get it and lift your hands, and nobody's gonna, we're all good. But there was some restraint on that thing. You know what I mean? It wasn't like a lost stallion going, okay. So you know what I'm saying. So I get involved in this church. That church, along with that pastor, changed my life. Through that church, I felt the call to ministry. I got involved in actually student ministry. I became a leader in the church and all that stuff. We left from there, from that church. It was in a really good place. I left from there and realized that God was calling me to go to Liberty University. One day, you might remember this, Ryan, Dr. Danny Lovett came to my school, came to my church. He preached. He would always say, Jesus is what? There you go. So he would always say, Jesus is awesome. So anyway, that was a sermon all the time. So he came to my church, preached, and I really felt like God tugged on my heart to like be a part of Liberty University. A year later, I put everything that I had up for sale, which wasn't much, but one of the things that I had for sale was a 300ZX, and it was my prize and joy. I loved that car, man. It was fast, it was fine, you know what I mean? It was bad. I loved it. Put it up for sale, and I told God, I said, God, listen, if you want me to go to school, you got to sell this car for me. And I remember literally putting that car up for sale, and I had the clothes laid out on my bed at home. And I said, God, I live in Louisiana. Virginia is 1,000 miles away, right? So I live in Louisiana. I'm like, God, if you want me to go, I'll go. I'll take this call to ministry. I'll go to Liberty University. You have to sell this car for me. And I remember making a deal with God. I'll never forget this. I said, God, if you want me to go, I need a car. So what I need for you to do is I need you to take this black 300ZX, and I'm going to get rid of it. But I need you to give me another car. But I need some money for school. So give me a cheaper car with some money. That's what I really need. And if you can do this for me, I want a Nissan Maxima or a Honda Accord. It's better. And then I said, and if you really do this for me, I really want a car, like black is cool, and if it's black, I don't want it to have a round interior. I want gray. Like 24 hours before I was supposed to be at Liberty, a guy calls me on the phone. He says, "Hey man," he's like, "Hey, I want to buy your car." I'm like, "Oh, that's great." He said, "I got a car. I want to trade you." I said, "Man, that's awesome. That's what I'm talking about. Bring that thing over." That dude drives up in a black Maxima with a gray interior. And I thought, I'll take it. I'll take it. And I had $3,000, which is enough to get me halfway, it paid for half of my first semester at Liberty. And I showed up at Liberty seeing God move in my life like I had never dreamed before. And that day, I left my friends in the dust when it came to faith. Wasn't nothing great about me, but that day, things changed for me. And so I go to Liberty, we get married, I meet my wife, I graduate with hardly any debt, God totally provided. Me and my wife get married, I go back to Bethel, my home church. And when we got back, I was there for 6 years. So I lived in Jennings, Louisiana, moved to Liberty, went back. When I go back, things were good for 3 years. I was there for 6. Things were good for 3. The last 3, it got real ugly. And just a lot of different things. There were some adulteries that went on. Adulteries, like as in plural, was crazy. Some confrontations. I was a leader in the church at that point. It really got real messy, real bad, real quick. But I remember towards the end of my time at that church, God started to work on me. And what he was saying and what I was asking myself was, as I looked across the church, the landscape of the church, I was asking myself, is this what Jesus died for? Is this it? And I come to the conclusion, if that was it, I didn't want anything of it. I was done. I was done with doing church that way. I was done with a church that had turned inward. I was done with a church that all they cared about were the people who were inside those four walls. I was done with that. I was done when we would try to do outreach projects and people in leadership would bucket that and say, "No, we don't want to do that." I was tired of people saying whenever we wanted to reach out to a world that they would call it a social gospel. I was tired of that stuff. And I decided that I was done with it. And that's when God said, "Hey, you can plant a church. Hey, if you can either do something about it or you can complain about it." So it was in those last 3 years that God birthed this idea in me and my family that, hey, you need to plant a church. I really thought that I could do it better. And hopefully you believe that we can do it better as well. Hopefully that's why you're here. But for me, it was absolutely crazy. I moved back to Virginia after that church time. I went to seminary. I met Pastor Jimmy. The rest is history. Here we are. So today, when we think about doing a church, you need to know, one of the reasons why I came is because I really thought that we could do it better. I really wasn't satisfied with what I saw in the church. Hopefully I hope that's not necessarily your reason for doing it, but for me, that's why. I loved Journey. I could have went to Journey and been hired on staff there and loved it. There was nothing. I loved Journey. But God was calling me to do something different. That wasn't what he was calling me to do. He was calling me to lead a church plant. And it was confirmed through people at Liberty that started jumping in on the team. Those 12 of you guys who moved down here with us, you were proof of the call of God in my life to do what we're doing today. So, what are some popular reasons what are some probably reasons why people came to this? Here we go. We're going to go through 6 of them really quick. One, some people felt complacent. Wherever you were complacent. You were like, hey, I'm not being stretched anymore. I just feel like I'm just coasting. That's a bad place to be as a Christian. Really, it's aggravating, right? You feel like, man, I want, and that actually number 2 is I want to be stretched. Some of you guys, that's what you said. I heard you say that. I wanted to be stretched. I wanted to give my life to something where I felt like I could be a part on the early side of it and really be used and be able to use my gifts and be able to say, hey God, I want to see you, I want to step out and I want to see you do something big. Not only in my life, but in the life of this church. I want to be on the front end of that. Number three is God told me to go. Some of you guys said literally, like, God told me to go. I remember I've heard that from a couple of you. Hey, that's a great reason to come. God told you to go. All right, you need to listen. Come on. All right. Number 4, some people said it's closer to my house, and I wasn't really connected before. A good bit of you like the idea of it being close to your house, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Also, some have said I wasn't really connected at Journey. There were some of you in here who were really connected at Journey, but the majority of you were not, and that's fine. I heard literally one couple told me just the other day. They said God called us to Journey so we could go with you. That's it. Like they were at Journey long enough to hear me say, hey, we're planning a church. And they're like, yep, that's it. Like, hey, all right. So God used Journey to bring you here. Love it. What else? I wasn't satisfied with my previous church. I haven't really heard people say that, but I think if we would get honest, there are some of us, they're like, you know. And that's where I was in some instances. But what I don't want us to be is the type of church that like dogs the other church because we don't feel like they're doing things right. We want to honor them and bless them. And I don't want to be the church that says, hey, we got it together. I might think we have it together, but I hope that we don't portray that attitude of saying, hey, we're better than you because we're really not. Number 6 and the last one, I like the vision. Some of you have talked about that. Like, literally, I love the vision of saying, hey, let's live out Christianity the way that we see in the book of Acts. And that doesn't mean that we stay a small church forever. What it means is we have environments and places where people can be connected and do what they did in Acts chapter 2. And we hold that as the standard and that as success, not just gathering on a Sunday. We can get a lot of people to gather on a Sunday. We will have a lot of people gather on a Sunday. This church will quadruple probably on our first meeting in August when we are public launch. Mark it. It will get big fast. That's why Jimmy said enjoy this time. That's why Pastor Jimmy, remember, said enjoy this time. Because we're able to live out and put in DNA into people of who we're about. You want to know what we're about? And we're going to talk values over the next couple weeks here. But one of the things you need to understand, we value the Acts chapter 2 type of church that says, hey, where's the place where you can actually live on mission with other people and people care about you and they know what's going on in your life and you're able to pour your heart and soul into someone. Where are you able to do that? We believe you can do that in a missional community. That's why at this stage, we say if you're going to be a part of Life City Church, we want you to be involved in the missional community. And it's huge. It's huge for us. It's huge. So, again, I ask you the question, why are you here? There's a lot of different reasons we can be here. And I'm not saying that one is, I'm going to give you in just a minute after we break up what I think is the primary reason we should be here. And you can shift that to your reason after you figure out what it is. But we're going to ask ourselves, why are we here? Okay? So here's what we're going to do. I'm not going to necessarily limit how big or how small those groups need to be, but I would say like maybe 2 or 3 groups within each section would be great. So this is not going to be a traditional type church service. So you take your chairs, swing around, find some friends, and you talk with some neighbors about why you're here. All right? Cool.